The country of Niger has elected to remove all French uranium companies from their country. The government of Niger, I guess you should say, the people didn't have much say in it, just the military leadership who runs the country right now. And this is going to have a few significant impacts on the world, I predict. The number one prediction I think this is going to have is Russia's going to win the war in Ukraine. It's pretty simple, the logic I'm drawing from point A, the Niger uranium, French uranium ban, to point B, Russia defeating Ukraine. The first half of that line of that journey from idea to idea is Russia's already winning. They're getting a Pyrrhic victory, so a victory where they lose more than they gain realistically, but they're still going to win. They're going to defeat Ukraine and establish some type of client state in that region, possibly just in the eastern half of the region, in the Russian majority areas at first, but eventually they're going to go all the way to Kiev and they're going to take that over completely. After that, they're probably going to go try to invade some of the other Baltic states. We'll see which ones. Some of them, Finland in particular, try to join NATO. So we'll see how that affects things. But Russia is going to eventually take over all of Ukraine, up to and including Kiev. The reason I believe that this is going to speed that process up, what's going on in Niger, is because Niger is one of Europe, specifically France's, largest uranium providers, and nuclear energy is the future in Europe. France has already accepted it. For France, a lot of it is already in the present. 1/3 of households in France receive the majority of their electricity from nuclear power plants. So it's already in the works there, so they're going to need to get uranium from somewhere to keep these plants running and to keep the energy going, to keep the lights on, especially as global warming hits. I'm in the U.S., and in the U.S. right now, there's a major heat wave breaking through and just torching people's homes, and a lot of the country has air conditioning here, which is a piece of technology that can condition the air. It can lower the overall heat that someone would experience in their home. But the majority of houses in Europe do not have that particular technology. So, for instance, France, the UK. The UK had a heat wave which was the equivalent of about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. I think it was 26 to 27 degrees Celsius, and that was causing heat stroke and death for those people. Here in the U.S., we're at 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which, give me one moment here, I'll try to see in real time if I can figure out what that is in Celsius, but 90 Fahrenheit to Celsius is basically 32 to 33 degrees. So on the low end is 33 degrees. It's probably, based on what I know, up to 35 degrees Celsius for the European or just non-American listeners, viewers, watchers, which means that as those temperatures become more frequent in other parts of the world, namely Europe is what I'm talking about, especially if the Gulf Stream collapses, Europe is going to become basically uninhabitable without air conditioning or some other form of indoor climate control. They're going to need a lot of energy to maintain those. And then the number one source in the future is going to be nuclear energy in Europe. They've already lost access to a lot of Russian gas, a lot of oil. They're going to lose access to more oil as the Middle East is increasingly destabilized, especially since America, for the most part, is trying to use its oil reserves to be self-sufficient. They're not trying to really flood the market or go crazy with that. So America, being a major oil producer, will not assist the Europeans in the coming crisis. What would help them out would be more uranium to run their nuclear power plants with, and one of the best suppliers of that for Europe, if we exclude Africa and these African countries that are having anti-French revolutions, the best supplier would be Russia. Russia would be able to supply huge amounts of energy for Europe if it wasn't currently under a dozen different embargoes and sanctions and different things that are preventing it from selling its goods in the normal ways. I believe several European countries are going to have to try to, several European leaders and governments are going to have to weigh out the pros and cons of allowing Russia to be more aggressive and to bully some of those Eastern European technical allies that they have, versus the pros and cons of going without power or of having to pay exorbitant prices for more uranium, more oil, more gas, more sources of energy. This is going to lead to a lot of interesting developments, not only in Europe, which is the main focus of what I'm talking about. I do believe that they're going to eventually I believe they're going to weigh their choices, weigh their options, and ultimately decide that giving in to Russia, capitulating a little bit, is better than the alternative of people dying of heat stroke every single summer and sometimes throughout the year in Europe. It's not really feasible for a nation to just let its citizens die from the weather changing. So, the most effective way I foresee this all resolving would be sort of similar to what happened prior to World War II with the German leadership at that time, who's since been deposed. They sort of had this process of appeasement where they said, okay, you can have this over here, just don't go too crazy. You can have Czechoslovakia, just don't do anything in Poland. Okay, you can have half of Poland, but it's going to be a lot of that with the Russian leadership in order to keep energy flowing. Now, it was highly criticized after World War II that they did that with the German leadership, but at the time it sort of made sense for people looking to avoid a war. I don't think a lot of these European countries are going to do it to avoid pure conflict. I mean, obviously they're trying to avoid greater war throughout the entire continent, but I think their primary concern is actually avoiding being completely shut off from energy markets, because right now the options are either go to work with Russia a little bit, or just go and completely colonize Africa, and just go in and bully them, push people around, do a lot of executions, do a lot of military operations, which, I mean, we've seen in European history. They haven't exactly been scared to do that in Africa throughout their history. So it's very likely that that could be a possibility. And hey, if you're a person who's willing to work for a private militia or a government-sponsored contractor, there may be a lot of money going and torturing and hurting African people for their resources in the near future. It might be similar to, the 100 Years' War, where a lot of different German private militias were paid by Protestants or Catholics or local rulers who were affiliated with one of the two major religions and just went around maiming and torturing and burning fields and stealing things from the peasants to fund their wars. Hey, if that sounds exciting to you, if you're an ambitious and slightly cruel and brutal person, it might be a good decade, good century even, ahead for you. If you're a regular person, hey, you already knew the world is getting tough, times are getting hard. Which brings me to my second point here, which is related to the heat wave again and the global climate change, but slightly on a different note. I believe part of the reason we're seeing such intense discourse in America, specifically in the sports world, as regards to Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, two professional female basketball players, is due to this heat wave. I mean, we've seen the science, we've seen the studies. When people are hot, when the temperature rises, people become more aggressive and more willing to not only argue and fight, but engage in violent crimes. And I do believe that we're going to see very soon some of these Caitlin Clark or Angel Reese, or just really the Caitlin Clark supporters or strong antagonists, people who truly hate her, her detractors. I think we're going to see a real divide between them, and I think at one of these games, we're going to get a real brawl, a real Malice in the Palace type event. Now, this is going to be interesting to watch, because I think there's one or two ways it could go when it all breaks down. Either, the most likely, clearly, is that the WNBA is historically an organization with very liberal track records. They've been very big on not only, the Black Lives Matter movement, the protests that occurred, police brutality type things, but they've also been very, very pro-gay rights, which makes sense. A lot of their players are members of the LGBT community, specifically the L's. They got a whole lot of L's in the WNBA, so we've seen Brittany Griner, we've seen a lot of these players. So it kind of makes sense that they have to be on the side of this issue. Some of the coaches have, made statements disparaging homosexual players in the past, but hey, they kept their jobs. Being a coach is, you're kind of expected to have a bit of an old school mentality with things like that. So it might enhance the divide, but luckily both the figureheads of the sort of up and coming race war within women's basketball are heterosexual women. So I don't expect it to turn into a Pride Month brawl or anything like that, but hey, if it happens before the month of June is over, you never know how things could be framed. But I do expect a violence at some upcoming WNBA game, and I think the outcome is either going to be the WNBA doubles down on liberalism and tries to start an anti-Clark sentiment, or they force her to, come out and say, this was wrong, my supporters are wrong, I don't like them, which would be interesting because I think it'd be bad for her business in particular. I think she's making a lot of sales right now of merchandise and just probably appearance fees to people like that. And if she's not, she should be, because it's a lot of money. So it's going to be really interesting to see how she handles it in particular, but I think the league is either going to completely disavow her or force her to disavow her most stringent supporters. And I think we're going to get something like that before the end of the summer, or who knows? This heat wave could go all the way into September. We could get multiple of these, especially in an election year with the upcoming election. I think the most likely catalyst for this is going to be Donald Trump. He's probably going to, at some point in the near future, at one of his rallies, do a speech where he speaks on Caitlin Clark. I believe he already has. I'll double check that though. Before next episode, I'll let you know. But I think he's going to do it again. He's going to really get the crowd going, maybe get like a Caitlin Clark chant going. And after that, we're going to really see antagonism, aggression between both sides really spark up, really heat up. And I think that's what's going to lead to that brawl, this outbreak of violence at some game or some other event. And we're going to see a lot of attention go to the sport. We can make the WNBA a lot of money, but a clear response from the people who run the organization against it, or against Caitlin Clark in particular. And if she, the biggest star in the sport right now, gets disavowed by the league and has to play somewhere else or in some other way, we could really start to see the breakdown of some other social institutions that are tied to sports, because sports are a big deal in America. They're sort of the equivalent of what gladiatorial combat was in ancient Rome. It's one of the few things, the bread and circuses, that keep things running. So if we start to see a breakdown in the entertainment industry, specifically as it relates to sports, I mean, I think things really might fall apart very quickly during this next election. As always, thank you for listening. Hope you all have a wonderful day. Just please like and subscribe.